Before we begin, picture the Danube at dawn, a wide, cold river that looks calm from a distance, until you realize it is a border made of water, a moving wall between empires. On the northern bank lies Wallachia, forests, marshes, narrow roads, and a people who survive by reading the land like a map of instincts. On the southern bank lies the Ottoman world, disciplined infantry, artillery, and the confidence of a rising imperial machine. Now imagine two young men, born within a year of each other, growing up under very different skies, yet pulled into the same current. Mehmed, the Ottoman prince, who will become the Conqueror, learns to think in campaigns and continents. Vlad, the Wallachian heir who will become the Impaler, learns to think in hostages, betrayals, and the price of fear. Their story is not just a clash of armies, it's a duel of methods, order versus terror, logistics versus ambush, imperial permanence versus the stubborn intelligence of a small frontier state. If you were standing with me on a muddy road near the Danube in 1462, hearing distant drums, smelling smoke, watching refugees and scouts stream past, what would you choose to trust? The power of numbers or the power of knowing every tree? This is the two lords of the Danube, from cradle to coronation, from raids to reckoning, and from one night of fire to a victory that costs more than it seems. One quick note before we ride into the story. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please subscribe. And don't forget to like this video. It genuinely helps the channel grow, and it tells YouTube to show this kind of documentary storytelling to more people. If you want the next episode, the next battle, the next voice in the dark, we need you with us. Now, let's cross the river. Chapter 1, Born into the Border. Let's start at the beginning, because with Vlad and Mehmed, the beginning matters. Vlad is born in 1431 in the Transylvanian town of Sighișoara. Stone walls, steep streets, the smell of smoke from hearths, merchants counting coins in several languages. Even the air there feels like a crossroads. He is born into a family that survives by balancing great powers, and balance on a frontier is never peaceful. His father, Vlad II, carries a dangerous badge of prestige. Dracul, linked to the Order of the Dragon, a chivalric oath meant to resist Ottoman expansion. Titles like that sound noble, until you realize they also paint a target on your back. In Wallachia, a ruler must fight on three fronts at once: the Ottoman Sultan to the south, the Hungarian crown to the west and north, and the boyars at home, nobles whose loyalty is a currency that devalues overnight. Mehmed is born the next year, 1432, in Edirne, then the Ottoman capital in Europe. If you were there, you'd feel it. The air in Edirne is thick with decisions. People speak softly because power is always listening. The palace is not just a home, it's a training ground. Princes are educated in languages, law, theology, poetry, and, most importantly, the habits of command. The Ottoman system is building something new in the region, a state that can raise taxes reliably, move troops methodically, and reward service with a logic that outlives any single man. Now, pause and picture the Danube. It isn't a simple line on a map. It's a highway and a moat at the same time. In summer, it carries boats, grain, messages, and soldiers. In winter, it freezes and lies, tricking men into thinking it is safe. North of it lies Wallachia, forests, marshes, and narrow roads that can swallow an army. South of it lies the Ottoman frontier, fortresses, garrisons, roads feeding into Edirne, and a military culture shaped by constant campaigning. Wallachia is not a comfortable kingdom, it's a buffer. Between the Carpathian Mountains and the Danube, it is a corridor that every larger power wants to control. The Carpathians form a jagged spine to the north, passes like doors that open into Transylvania. Whoever controls those passes controls escape, trade, and reinforcements. And that's why Wallachia is always being squeezed. If it leans too much toward Hungary, the Ottomans punish it. If it leans too much toward the Ottomans, Hungary distrusts it. If it leans toward neither, the Boyars consider replacing its ruler with someone more practical. So Vlad grows up learning a brutal lesson early. A throne here is not inherited. It is negotiated with steel. And then the negotiation turns into a hostage exchange. In the early 1440s, Vlad and his younger brother Radu are sent to the Ottoman court as hostages, political insurance to keep their father compliant. Imagine being a teenager taken across the Danube, watching your homeland fade behind you and realizing your life is now a receipt in someone else's ledger. If that were you, would you adapt? Or would you memorize every humiliation and save it like a knife? As a hostage, Vlad is not treated like a chained prisoner. He is watched, educated, and controlled. Ottoman power at its most refined. You learn the language, you learn the etiquette. You see janissaries drill until their movements look like one organism. You see scribes turning war into columns of numbers, and you learn a key lesson. The empire's strength is not only courage, it's organization. Mehmed in these years is also learning, but from the inside. He is taught to think in systems, how a fortress falls, how a city is governed, how a rebellion is prevented. He absorbs the idea that a ruler is not only a warrior, he is an architect of stability. When Mehmed later becomes the conqueror, it won't be because he is merely brave. It will be because he can turn bravery into policy. Now, the 1450s arrive like a storm. Mehmed becomes sultan in 1451. 2 years later, in 1453, he takes Constantinople, an event so loud it echoes across Europe like a church, bell shattering. From this moment, everyone near the Danube understands. The Ottoman state is not simply expanding, it is becoming inevitable. If you could stand in a Transylvanian market that year, you'd hear the news travel mouth to mouth like something contagious. The city has fallen. And with it, the balance of the region tilts. Vlad's path back to Wallachia is paved with betrayal and loss. His father is killed in 1447. His older brother Mircea is murdered. Wallachia changes hands like a knife in a street fight. Vlad briefly takes the throne in 1448, then loses it. He spends years on the margins, moving through Moldavia and Transylvania, negotiating, gathering men, watching which lords switch sides. This is where he hardens, not in a palace, but on roads, among mercenaries, in the shadow of stronger kings. When Vlad finally returns and secures power in 1456, he behaves like a man who believes time is against him. He strengthens key strongholds, mountain routes, river crossings, and interior roads. He relies on the old fortress of Poenari above the Argeș River as a hard refuge, a stone claw in the mountains, and he does something that tells you exactly what kind of ruler he intends to be. He targets the boyars who have betrayed his family, and he makes punishment public, spectacle as policy. People later call him the Impaler, but think of it in tactical terms. He is trying to freeze dissent with fear. On a frontier where loyalties melt quickly, he chooses terror as a form of glue. If you were a boyar at one of his councils, would you dare to whisper against him? Would you risk a secret letter to Hungary? Or would you convince yourself that obedience is the safest kind of virtue? That's how Vlad wants you to think. So by the late 1450s, we have two rulers taking shape like opposing weapons. Mehmed, an imperial engineer building a machine that can move armies, build bridges, drag cannons, and break cities. Vlad, a border lord building a reputation so sharp it can cut before the sword even swings. And somewhere between them is the Danube, wide, cold, patient, a river that doesn't care who's right, only who crosses and who returns. Chapter 2. Tribute, Insults, and the Winter War. If you want to understand why the Danube turns red in this story, you need to understand tribute. Wallachia pays the Ottomans a regular tax, money, goods, sometimes manpower, because that payment buys breathing room. It is not friendship. It is rent paid to a giant so the giant does not sit on your house. And on the Ottoman side, tribute is not just income, it's a signal. It says the frontier is stable. The Sultan's authority reaches even beyond the river. Vlad, ruling firmly from 1456 onward, plays a dangerous double game. He strengthens fortresses, secures the Carpathian passes into Transylvania, and tries to centralize authority at his capital, Targoviste. Picture that city, not a sprawling imperial metropolis, but a hard, functional seat, palace, churches, workshops, and roads that vanish into forest. It is a good place to rule if you believe the forest is a weapon. He also tightens control over trade routes and the Saxon towns north of Wallachia's borders because money feeds war. Merchants grumble, nobles resent being disciplined, and enemies collect gossip like arrows. Vlad knows this, and he leans into it. He wants to be feared more than he is loved, because love is fickle on a frontier. For several years, Vlad sends tribute, at least enough to avoid an immediate invasion, but he also raids, negotiates with Hungary, and tests the Ottoman edge. And then, around 1461, the balance snaps. Vlad stops paying, at least fully, and begins treating Ottoman demands not as orders, but as provocations. Whether it begins with a dispute over money, over border control, or over the required attendance of Wallachian forces in Ottoman campaigns, the practical result is the same. Vlad is challenging the hierarchy. Here the sources get tangled with legend, stories of envoys and punishments, of insults returned with brutal symbolism. But even if we strip out the dramatic embroidery, the strategic point is clear. Vlad wants to show that the Danube is not a one-way street. If the Ottomans can intimidate Wallachia, Wallachia can bleed the Ottomans. So Vlad chooses timing like a thief chooses a dark alley. Winter. In late 1461 and early 1462, he launches raids south of the Danube into Ottoman-held towns and supply nodes, places along the river corridor that feed garrisons and support crossings. Winter is not just weather, it's a tactic. Roads freeze, rivers become unpredictable, and large armies struggle to feed themselves. Vlad's men move fast, travel light, and strike targets that matter: depots, outposts, boats, and ferries, the small pieces that make an empire's frontier work. Now imagine you're with me, riding at night, no torches, because light is a promise of death. You hear hooves on frozen ground, the creak of leather, the whisper of breath. The Danube looms like a black ribbon. Somewhere ahead, a watchtower stands, a single fire flickering. And then the sudden chaos of a raid. Dogs barking, doors breaking, arrows shouting in languages you don't understand. Vlad is not seeking a battle here. He's seeking a ledger of damage, burned stores, destroyed rivercraft, fear planted in every garrison. This is asymmetric war. Mehmed's empire is a machine, but machines have weak points, fuel, and supply. Vlad's Wallachia cannot win a set-piece fight, so it attacks the parts of the machine that are not armored. And the psychological side matters as much as the material side. Frontier soldiers start to sleep in armor. Commanders post extra guards. Rumors spread. The Wallachian comes at night. Do you know what that does to an army? It steals rest. It steals confidence. It makes every shadow expensive. Mehmed receives reports the way a modern leader receives briefings. Names of towns, numbers of dead, the loss of boats, the shock to prestige. And prestige matters. On a frontier, reputation is a kind of currency. If Wallachia can refuse tribute and survive, other vassals may think the same thought. So Mehmed decides to answer personally, and this is where you feel the difference between a border lord and an emperor. When Mehmed moves, he moves with infrastructure, janissaries, professional infantry, disciplined and lethal, Sipahi cavalry, armored horsemen who can exploit open ground, artillery, because Mehmed believes problems can be solved by engineering and fire, engineers and carpenters, because rivers are obstacles only till you bring wood, rope, and plan. And above all, logistics, carts, animals, pontoon materials, scribes, and a chain of command that can keep an army alive. There is also the Danube flotilla, boats that escort crossings, move supplies, and threaten the northern bank. Think of the invasion as a combined operation, army, river transport, and political messaging all moving together. Now, Vlad watches this storm forming, and he does not try to stop it at the river. With a heroic speech, he prepares the land. He orders scorched earth, food removed, villages evacuated, wells spoiled, fodder destroyed. It's brutal, especially for civilians, but it forces the invading army to carry more supplies and starves it of local support. He sends small units to harass scouts and foragers, turning every mile into a wound. And he uses intelligence, local guides, spies, and the simple advantage of being at home. He can vanish into reeds and woods that an outsider cannot read. If you were marching with the Ottomans into Wallachia, you would feel it as an absence. No bread to buy, no hay to seize, no friendly guides, only smoke on the horizon and the sense that the forest has eyes. By the time Mehmed's army crosses into Wallachia in 1462, this is no longer a simple punitive expedition. It's a chase through a hostile landscape toward an enemy who refuses to stand still. And that refusal, more than any single weapon, becomes Vlad's signature. One more detail, because it's easy to miss. The Danube is not just a barrier, it's a supply system. Mehmed's crossings rely on boats, ferries, and engineers. Vlad's raids aim at exactly those boring assets: craft, storehouses, and river posts. So the invasion has to carry more food and move more cautiously. That is why winter matters. It turns logistics into a weapon. Chapter 3, Night Attack at Targoviste. Now we reach the heart of the story, and I want you to slow down here, because this is where tactics become drama. It is 1462. Mehmed's army pushes north, deeper into Wallachia, aiming for the capital at Targoviste and the capture or death of Vlad. When a great army moves, it leaves a trail you can read like footprints in wet clay. Trampled fields, broken fences, frightened villages, exhausted animals. Mehmed's force is large enough to feel like a season rather than an event. And Vlad knows the rule of small states. You don't survive by matching force with force. You survive by choosing the terms of contact. Vlad's problem is simple and terrifying. He cannot win a daytime battle, so he tries to win the war by breaking the enemy's certainty. Think of Wallachia's terrain, forests that swallow sound, marshes that turn heavy armor into anchors, narrow roads where an ambush can cut a column in half, and the Danube behind the Ottomans. An escape route, yes, but also a long line of supply that can be severed. Vlad uses all of it. He sends riders to strike the flanks, burns camps, kills stragglers, and spreads panic. He attacks at dawn and vanishes before noon. He turns villages into empty shells so the invaders can't live off the land. He poisons the campaign's rhythm. March, rest, forage, repeat, until the repeat become impossible. And then, as Mehmed approaches Targovishte, Vlad takes a risk that feels almost insane. He aims for the Sultan's life. This is not romantic assassination, it's operational logic. If the Sultan dies, the campaign's command structure shatters. Even the best army needs a center. Kill the center, and the periphery collapses into confusion and retreat. Vlad is gambling that one night can compensate for months of imbalance. Picture the Ottoman camp near Targovishte, tense like a moving city, organized in rings with elite units close to the center. Fires glow, guards patrol. Somewhere, imams recite prayers. Somewhere else, soldiers gamble with bones or coins, trying to forget that Wallachia is eating their sleep. And beyond the ring of light, Wallachian riders wait in darkness. If you were there with them, you'd smell sweat and horse, feel the cold metal of a blade in your hand, and wonder if courage is just fear that has nowhere to go. You'd also hear the quiet instructions, short, practical, because speeches are useless when your enemy can hear you breathe. Vlad's men used deception, captured standards, familiar signals, clothing that can pass for Ottoman auxiliaries in the confusion. At night, identity is fragile. One wrong word, one wrong banner, and you are dead. But if you can get close enough, the darkness becomes a weapon. Then, impact. A sudden rush into the camp. Shouting, steel striking steel, horses screaming, tents collapsing, fires starting like angry stars. This is the famous night attack, June 1462, remembered because it is war as theater and war as technique at the same time. The raiders aim for the command tent. They cut through guards, strike at officers, set fire to supply points. The point is not just killing, it is disorganization. If the camp cannot form lines, if units cannot identify their commanders, discipline becomes a rumor rather than a reality. For a moment, the impossible seems possible. In the chaos, units strike toward the heart of the camp, but the camp is huge. In the darkness, even a correct plan can miss by a few hundred steps, and a few hundred steps is the difference between the Sultan and a decoy position. Ottoman discipline shows itself here. Janissaries rally, trumpets and drums call men into formation even under confusion. Defensive rings harden, and Vlad, realizing the center is not breaking fast enough, pulls away before daylight traps his smaller force. Mehmed survives. Now imagine the morning after. Smoke drifting, charred cloth, bodies being gathered, soldiers staring at one another with the hollow look of people who survived something their planning did not predict. Mehmed understands he has entered a different kind of war, one where the enemy treats the rules as optional. And Vlad understands something too. He can wound the imperial machine, but he cannot stop it from moving. Then Mehmed reaches Targovishte. This is where Vlad plays psychological warfare at its most extreme. Outside the city, Mehmed's forces encounter what later observers describe as a forest of impaled corpses, thousands arranged to shock. It is not only cruelty, it is messaging. Vlad is saying, this land will not feed you, will not welcome you, and will not obey you. It will disgust you. Stand with me at the edge of that field if you can. The air would be heavy, summer heat, rot, smoke. Not just with the smell, but with the realization that you're facing an enemy who is willing to turn horror into policy. How do you command an army through that? Do you push forward out of pride or pull back out of sanity? Mehmed does not collapse. He is an emperor. He has seen blood. But even an emperor has limits, especially when the campaign is costing time, men, and supplies, and when every mile forward feels like walking into a trap. So Mehmed adjusts. He looks for a political solution as much as a military one. If Vlad cannot be captured easily, perhaps Vlad can be replaced. Enter Radu, Vlad's brother, raised in the Ottoman sphere, polished, acceptable to boyars who fear Vlad's punishments. Mehmed supports Radu as an alternative ruler, offering Wallachian elites a way to survive without living under Vlad's terror. This is imperial strategy at its sharpest. If you can't break the land, break the coalition, turn local power against itself. And it begins to work. Boyars defect. Cities hesitate. Local leaders calculate their odds like gamblers. Vlad finds himself fighting not only Mehmed's army, but the slow erosion of his own base. By late summer, the campaign's outcome is no longer decided by one battlefield. It is decided by loyalty, exhaustion, and the brutal arithmetic of politics. The Danube, again, is not just a river. It is the line where courage meets logistics, and where Vlad's method, for all its brilliance, begins to run out of room. Chapter 4. The Price of Victory. So who wins the duel? Of the Danube, the honest answer is Mehmed wins the strategic objective, but Vlad wins the terrifying legend. After the night attack and the shock outside Targoviste, Mehmed does not need to capture Vlad personally to claim success. He needs Wallachia back within the Ottoman orbit, paying tribute, obeying the frontier order, not inspiring rebellion elsewhere. Supporting Radu accomplishes that more reliably than chasing Vlad through forests forever. And here's something important to notice. Mehmed's strength is not only the sword, it is the ability to convert a battlefield into administration. A ruler who can replace an enemy with a more workable local ally often wins more than the ruler who simply kills. So while the Ottoman army begins to withdraw southward, the political pressure remains on the northern bank. Radu advances with Ottoman backing and Wallachian boyars, many of whom fear Vlad as much as they fear the Ottomans, start to drift toward the safer bet. Imagine being a local lord with a family, land, and rivals. You don't ask, who is morally right? You ask, who will still be standing next month? That is how frontier politics eats ideals. Vlad, pressured from multiple directions, retreats north toward Transylvania. And here, the map matters again. The Carpathian passes are gates. Control the passes, and you control escape, trade, and reinforcements. Vlad tries to find support among the Hungarians and the Saxon towns, but politics is colder than winter raids. Hungary's king, Matthias Corvinus, is balancing threats, alliances, and his own legitimacy. He wants a strong buffer against the Ottomans, yes, but he also wants a buffer he can control. Vlad comes asking for help, and the help is conditional. Funding, troops, recognition, these come with strings. And in a bitter twist, Vlad is eventually arrested and held. Some accounts say letters were produced to justify the arrest, documents that paint Vlad as unreliable, perhaps even colluding. Whether those letters were genuine or convenient, the effect is real. The man who used fear as a weapon becomes a prisoner of diplomacy. If you were Vlad, sitting behind stone walls after living on horseback, what would hurt more, the chains or the fact that your enemies didn't even need to kill you? And if you were a Wallachian peasant hearing rumors, what would you believe? That your prince was betrayed by allies, or that he finally met the consequences of his own brutality? Meanwhile, Radu rules in Wallachia with Ottoman support. Tribute resumes. The Danube remains an Ottoman-controlled artery. The frontier stabilizes, at least in the way empires like stability. Predictable payments, predictable obedience, predictable leadership. Mehmed can turn his attention to other theaters, confident that the northern bank is no longer an open wound. But Vlad's story refuses to end cleanly, because the region itself refuses to stay still. The 14 Daphnes bring new pressures, shifting alliances, new campaigns, and the constant fear that any frontier settlement could become a battlefield again. Vlad is eventually released and re-enters politics, older, hardened, and carrying the strange legitimacy that captivity sometimes creates. To some, he is a monster. To others, he is the only man who proved the Ottomans could be hurt. In 1476, in the chaos of regional power struggles, Vlad regains the Wallachian throne for a final time. This last return has the feeling of an old blade being drawn from its sheath, still sharp but scarred, and perhaps too late. Support comes from neighboring rulers who also fear Ottoman expansion, alliances of convenience, not affection. And then his end arrives quickly, killed in battle or ambushed near Bucharest, late 1476 or early 1477, depending on the account. His head is said to have been sent south as proof, a grim administrative detail in a world where bodies were receipts. Even his death becomes part of the frontier's paperwork, confirmation that a problem has been resolved. So, what do we do with this ending? If you're listening to this as a story, you might want a clean victory, one hero, one villain, one final duel. But history rarely gives that satisfaction. Mehmed secures the frontier and proves that the Ottoman state can absorb shocks without losing momentum. That is victory of a certain kind, the victory of institutions, resources, and continuity. Wallachia remains for long stretches within the Ottoman sphere, taxed, influenced, watched. Vlad proves that a small ruler can wound an empire by turning geography and psychology into weapons. That is victory of another kind, the victory of defiance, memory, and myth. His tactics, scorched earth, night raids, targeted terror, manipulation of fear, are the toolbox of a weaker force fighting a stronger one, centuries before we gave those methods modern names. The two lords of the Danube never truly stop fighting. One wins the map, the other wins the nightmare people can't forget. And there is a final layer, narrative. After 1462, stories about Vlad spread fast. Some paint him as a holy defender, others as a nightmare made flesh. That reputation affects alliances. Rulers fund heroes more easily than monsters. Mehmed understands this too. Conqueror is not only a nickname, it's a strategic message meant to make resistance feel futile. So when we say Mehmed wins, be precise. He wins because his state can replace losses, keep marching, and turn crisis into administration. When we say Vlad wins the legend, be precise too. He proves a small frontier can impose costs, force caution, and make even an emperor hesitate, if only for a season. If you enjoyed this documentary-style story, please subscribe to the channel and like the video. It makes a real difference. And tell me in the comments, whose strategy impressed you more, Mehmed's imperial machine or Vlad's ruthless border warfare? Your feedback helps shape what story we tell next. Until then, keep your eyes on the river, and I'll see you in the next video.